welcome everyone to our Stoeckle Center seminar. I'm Bill Kormos, the Education Director of the Stoeckle Center, and happy to kick off 2021 with one of our favorite seminars of the year. Quick announcement, next month, February, last Friday in February, February 26th, we are pleased to announce our Alan Sandler Scholar in General Internal Medicine. Once a year, we have a visiting professor. This year, of course, it'll be a virtual visiting professor, which actually made it so awesome to be able to get Dr. Hardeep Singh from Baylor College of Medicine and the DeBakey VA Medical Center in Houston to join us for our Stoeckle Center seminar next month. Dr. Singh's an expert in diagnostic error in electronic health records, in patient safety in the ambulatory setting. So very pertinent to a lot of the things that we are focused on. So I think it'll be a really great visit. Stay tuned for your email announcements for our Sandler Scholar, Dr. Singh, next month. All right, jumping into today, very excited once again to have our fifth annual Writers Workshop or Showcase. I think back 4 years ago after a presidential inauguration and how the mood was at that time when this series kicked off with its first Writers Workshop, and so excited that 4 years later for our fifth one feels pretty good, not just because we've had 5 of these. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Suzanne Koven as our moderator. She is a primary care physician at the Bullfinch Medical Group, where she was a founding member over 30 years ago. She is our inaugural writer in residence at MGH. You've seen her work in the New England Journal of Medicine, JAMA, Lancet, Boston Globe, many other publications. And her book, not posed behind her in true Zoom fashion just yet, Letter to a Young Female Physician, Notes from a Medical Life, will be published very soon in May by W.W. Norton and Company. So we're excited to look for that. Dr. Koven, take it away.
Thank you, Bill, and good morning, everyone. I don't know about you, but I miss the bananas and the cinnamon raisin bagels, the little round tray. I know. All right, well, this is good too. So 2 days ago, the most powerful human being on the planet was inaugurated into office, and a 22-year-old poet stole the show. How could this be? In the middle of a pandemic, an economic crisis, a poet and a poem stole the show. I will even go one further. The meme going around of Bernie Sanders with the mittens. Why is that so ubiquitous? I think both are rooted in the same thing, which is that as human beings, our need to make story, and when we're suffering, to change story, or if we can't change story, make beauty or humor out of story, is just simply fundamental. In the case of the Bernie Sanders meme, what was going on there, if you think about it? We were poking affectionate fun at a politician who, by the way, is not known for his self-deprecating humor, who himself joined in on the fun. Hey, we make good mittens in Vermont, he said. He sensed, as we all sensed, that we needed to laugh, that we needed to turn a narrative corner. Now, I know this as a writer, and yet I needed to relearn it last spring. The pandemic started and I thought, well, there goes my writer in residence role. I mean, who's going to have time for that nonsense? Poetry workshops, writing, that's not important when we're talking about PPE shortages. But a really strange thing happened. My inbox by the middle of March was filled every day with manuscripts. Our colleagues writing poems, blogs, op-eds, stories, or simply saying, I want to write something that I can leave for my grandchildren about this. You're going to hear today from 3 of our colleagues who have done some beautiful writing and storytelling and taken it into the public space. I'm going to introduce them one at a time. They're going to tell you a little bit about their writing, read from their writing, and then we're going to do a Q&A, which I'll moderate from the chat, or maybe you can unmute and shout out, unless that becomes total chaos, which maybe wouldn't even be so bad. So, you know, when someone thinks about writing in the middle of a catastrophe, they may think, oh, you know, I'm not that important and I don't have anything like, you know, really important to say, or, you know, I wasn't part of like the vaccine development or something like that. And yet some of the most beautiful writing that's come out of this pandemic has been hinged from tiny moments. And I think one of the most beautiful is a New England Journal piece called The Ritual of the Table, written by our colleague, Susan Hatta, who we're going to hear from first. So since moving to Boston in 2007 after medical school and residency training at Vanderbilt, Dr. Hatta has enjoyed providing primary care to adults and children at MGH Back Bay, and she serves as the Associate Program Director for the MGH Internal Medicine and Pediatrics residency for the past 12 years. She's passionate about supporting residents in training and creating space for physicians to reflect and share experiences with one another. She leads physician support interventions for residents and faculty in the departments of both medicine and pediatrics, and conducts research in resilience and burnout. Let's welcome Dr. Hatta. And if you're not speaking, please do mute.
Thank you so much, Suzanne, and thank you to Bill and to all of you for making space in our divisions learning for talking about writing. I'm going to share my screen here because I just have a couple of slides. Hopefully, can everyone see? It's really a pleasure to speak a little bit about my writing process with you. I'm sharing really just in the hopes that what is helpful to me might be helpful to some of you, and that if I can share my story about writing, it can really encourage and embolden and inspire others to consider telling some of their stories as well. For me, writing, I would say, has been an on-again, off-again practice. I wrote a lot privately as a medical student to process my experiences. And at the time, I was very influenced by the work of Rita Sharon in narrative medicine. But for me, residency was really a wilderness time in which it was really difficult for me to find words for my experiences. And at times I felt lost and alone in understanding what my work was doing to me and who I was in my work. As an attending, and I think in large part as a result of those wilderness years for me, now one of my professional missions is to make space for us to reflect upon our work and who we are in it. And for me now, writing is really, has become a wonderful way for me to do that. And so for me, writing has really become the touch point for keeping me connected to what I love about what I do, what is really beautiful and special about what all of us do in terms of connecting with patients, but what is also difficult at times about it. And so for me, I really try to write as a way of honoring our experiences, honoring my patients and our colleagues and each other. And what I find when I do that is that I am encouraged and emboldened to continue doing this work And it's my hope that perhaps that happens for other people when I share it. I know it certainly happens for me when I read the work of other people. So this year I have felt more deeply than ever before that the work that we do is beautiful and important and meaningful and necessary. And yet at the same time, never have I felt that it's more devastatingly heartbreaking at times. And in many ways this year, I found myself revisiting those wilderness memories of residency. These are the shoes that I wore for, I think, over 150 nights of call in the hospital for 4 years. And I got them back out this spring because they're easy to clean, and I still had them. And I wore them to my shifts in the rec clinic and to primary care. And in that very physical way, I found myself also figuratively in my heart and my mind revisiting a lot of those memories of my training, and in a way reclaiming them and seeing the ways that they prepared me for what we have all gone through in the last months. And I also at the same time found myself differently this time than in that past wilderness time in my life, constantly jotting down notes, moments that I wanted to remember, experiences that I didn't want to lose. I think I felt a tremendous urgency to do that. I think in speaking with many colleagues, many of the rest of you did as well. Perhaps that was in part a hope that the experience that we were having was going to be short. I think now a year later, we know that's not been the case. But I found myself really trying to capture the moments and experiences to try to understand them later. So for me, one of those moments happened in the RIC in March of 2020, and it led me to write a piece, as Suzanne mentioned, called The Ritual of the Table, which was published in the New England Journal online in July and in print in October. And it was really, for me, an essay about homesickness and longing for the moments that I loved and missed about my primary care life. And I found myself using the language and metaphor of hospitality, comparing the exam table to my dinner table. And I also found myself exploring the surprises in virtual visits and finding that I was confirming to myself what I hoped was true, which is that we can still stay true to who we are and to our work, even when the rituals of our exam tables and our dinner tables are disrupted. So I thought I would read for a moment part of that piece for you. Actually, let me just pull that up. Stop sharing while I do that. The Ritual of the Table. I am standing in the COVID-19 respiratory clinic, wearing a gown and a mask and a face shield, and I'm bending over the exam table, earnestly wiping it down with gloved hands and sanitizing wipes. I'm taking care as if my life depends on it, because it does, and so does the life of the next patient who will sit on this table. As I lean over and move the cloth back and forth across the surface, a flash of recognition makes me pause. I've never been in this clinic before, but I've done this before, felt this before. It takes a moment for me to place the experience. The motion as I clean the exam table is the same physical movement I perform every night as I wash my kitchen table after an afternoon of homework and artistic mess before we gather around it for our nightly family meal. Suddenly, my current task feels holy, an act of preparation for something both ordinary and sacred to happen. For me, these are both acts of love. Let me share my screen back again and get back to my slides. I thought it might be helpful as I share a little bit about my writing process. And I want to just be clear, it's a writing process. I'm an amateur writer, not a professional writer. But just in hopes that if I can articulate what works for me as I write, perhaps it will be helpful to others. So for me, as I said, writing is a way of staying connected to and understanding my experiences in my work. And so it really begins with me for noticing and gathering the moments of my day, and then writing to understand them, and then sometimes writing to share them, somewhat carefully and trepidatiously at times. So this New England Journal piece, the passage that I just read, started here. It started in the RIC, as I said, but it started here on this page of my notebook. in March of 2020 with this little phrase that I scratched out: cleaning the exam table as if my life depended on it, because that's how it felt to me at the time. Thinking back to those early days in which we had so much fear and so much meticulousness, it was a moment that I wanted to remember. I can still feel that sensation of standing in the RIC in the full PPE. I think so many of us worked there at that time and remember the heightened emotion, the fear, the care that we took in cleaning those rooms, because at that time we really did think that physical cleaning was such an important piece. And what I actually felt in the wave of emotion at the time was I felt really connected to an older man at MGH Back Bay who cleans our exam tables every night after the practice closes. His name is Ming. And as I washed that table, I thought about Ming and how he washes my exam tables for me every night in non-pandemic times. And so at first I thought, when I jotted this phrase in my notebook, that this was going to be a piece about a kinship with him and a kinship with all of the people that make our lives work on a daily basis. But what really evolved as I wrote it was that I realized that this moment in the RIC really meant something different actually to me. And so Suzanne may not know this, but the next stop for my New England Journal essay, after that little scratched out note in my notebook, was really during one of her Saturday Zoom writing workshops. She held these primarily for house staff, although she was generous enough to allow some of us to drop in. And she would encourage us to write the physical details of situations. And so I found myself writing out the physical details of that moment in the RIC. And as I did that, I found myself writing this sentence. I was talking about the patient that I had just seen. Everything I would normally do in this situation has been taken away from me, in the sense that I couldn't reach out and touch the patient. I couldn't give her a hug as she wept. And so as I wrote, the story of what that moment meant to me began to change. And for me, when I'm writing to understand, I sit with some questions, which are really, I sort of ask myself, what was really happening here? What was this really about? What's important here? And so as I, in Suzanne's workshop, wrote that phrase, everything I normally would do has been taken away from me, I circled that, and then I wrote the story again later. And it became a story, as I've said, about everything I loved and missed about primary care and everything that I was afraid to lose. And so I share that just in the sense of encouraging you, as you sit with your experiences of your life. I encourage you to jot down those notes like I did in my notebook. Maybe that will look differently for some of you. Maybe it's notes in your phone. But then spending some time really sitting with those experiences and learning from them about what's important to you. And the revision process can really clarify that. It certainly did for me. And then for me, there's always another decision point about whether that's the end of the story and whether it stays in that notebook or in my computer, never to see the light of day for anyone else, or whether I'm going to share it with others. And that's a time for me in which I sort of sit with another set of questions, which is, who am I really writing this for? What will happen for me and for others if I share this? What good will come of that? What conversations could come from that? And so again, Suzanne was really helpful for me in thinking through that. And when I sort of sit with those questions, it means a lot of the things that I write actually stay in the journal for now. Maybe they'll see the light of day sometime. Maybe they'll tell their story later. But with this piece, what I really wanted to do in sharing it was to give a voice to all of us, because that moment that I had in the RIC and the longing and homesickness that I had for my daily moments of primary care, I knew was something that all of you were experiencing in different ways. That conflict of feeling a little bit lost, feeling homesick for what we loved, but yet a little bit hopeful, a little bit curious about what we were actually doing. So another question that I sit with myself sometimes, both with writing and in my personal life, is to say, is this really true? So I sort of interrogated that question of everything that I normally would do has been taken from me. And I found myself saying, is that really true? Is everything that I would normally do really taken away? Yes, I can't touch my patients when I'm doing virtual visits, but is it really true that everything is lost? And the answer for me has been no. There still is so much connection that's possible. And so I went on in my essay to explore virtual visits and the surprises that I found there. And it changed the narrative of the piece and my understanding of my work again, to see that, yes, my rituals of primary care had been disrupted, but I was not taken away. My presence with my patients still somehow was happening through the screen. And so I explored that later in the piece. And so that the story of what those moments really meant for me kind of unfolded as I sort of asked myself some of these questions. And so I decided to share it. Suzanne was incredibly helpful at that point of reading the piece and encouraging me to submit it and helping me to decide where to send it, who it was for. And I'm delighted to say that it did lead to a lot of really wonderful conversations with many of you, with many colleagues here at MGH, people across the country via email. And something that was actually really special and somewhat unexpected was that a couple of my patients did find it and read it. And so we had some really beautiful conversations about their perspective on virtual visits and their experience of being cared for by doctors during this time. So I hope that some of the things that I've shared are helpful. I encourage all of you, like my future writer daughter, Meg, to explore your writing, no matter how early it may be. For me, it's been incredibly helpful in understanding what I love about what I do and what we all do, and trying to give honor and voice to it.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Susan, not only for sharing your writing, but also your process and your purpose. That was really beautiful. Next, we're going to hear from Michael Beer. You know, I think we all know we have a really kind of special family in the DGIM, and we all contribute to that. But there are some people in this family who, partly by virtue of how long they've been in it, but more importantly, simply by who they are, really give this division its special character. And I don't think I'd get any argument if I said that Michael is one of those people. He received his medical degree from Albert Einstein and then trained in primary care at Mass General and received his MPH at Harvard. He practiced addiction medicine at BU and worked for Boston Healthcare for the Homeless from 1989 to 2002. He's been working in the IMA in substance use disorders and primary care since 2002. And he's the clinical lead for the Substance Abuse Disorders Initiative in the IMA. And as we're about to hear, he's also a poet. Michael.
Thank you for that very nice introduction. And thank you for your support and for doing what you do. I thought what I would do is just dive in and read the poem, then talk a little bit about it and background, and then maybe if there's time, read it again at the end, see if there's a difference in the way it sounds and the way you hear it, and what it means before and after, and see how it goes. So let me get to it. It's called My COVID Epitaph. If I do not survive COVID, please note the hopes we shaped before. The concerts, hikes, and family feasts still on schedule, still in store. I can write my colleagues tributes now. I hope you will be flattered. How you toiled, co-authored, supported staff. You smiled when it mattered. But we will die. I'm sorry, friend, that for us, it could be sharply while we labor on. Do you think that's as it should be? In the hallways, exam rooms and clinics, doctoring amid pain and tears, shared mission, on-call nights, holding kind gravitas, calming our fears. What I left of me at the hospital, excuse me, what I left of me at the hospital created a void we sensed elsewhere. Keying our door, scratching sweet Maggie in my lap, iPhone, my comfy chair. They bravely passed with no regrets. We salute them now. We loved, respected, and mourned them. But whom did I fail and how? The context. This was the graph that, oh, I need to share. Sorry, let me get back to you, get to the share screen and go. It'll take 1 second because I need to adjust before I share. Tick, 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 good. Now I will go to this and share. So this is the poem. We'll get to it again. This is the graph that was sent out this week from Hicks or MGH about the number of patients in the hospital with COVID-19. This is an epidemic, and I think it's appropriate to talk about colleagues in my life in epidemics. One was John Stoeckle, who greeted me in 1985 when I started my clinic in IMA2. The way he greeted everyone, sticking out his hand, smiling, looking you in the eye and saying, "Welcome to Mass General," in his quirky way. And I witnessed it day after day with new patients, with new staff. And were he here today, he would be welcoming you all the same way. And it's so appropriate that this is a seminar about writing about COVID. He was taken by COVID well into his 90s this summer. And it is in his name that we meet. And I just felt like we should mention that. He's a few years later, when I started Healthcare for the Homeless program, I met a doctor named Tom Bennett. He died of AIDS 25 years ago, January 26th. He was an amazing man, and he also welcomed me into medicine in a way, into the world of homeless healthcare, along with Jim O'Connell and others. And he also was a sweet man with a sweet smile and a gleam in his eye, cared for meticulously by our colleague Howard Heller. And I'm grateful to Howard for his care of Tom. And I wanted to remember Tom today also, because this is about epidemic and death. This is March 23rd. And March 23rd is when I wrote the poem. I was feeling a lot of things, and the context was complicated for all of us. And for me in particular, I'll tell you a little bit about what was going on. So it was published in March at Reflective Med Ed. March was weird. It was the first time Boston was silent with no cars in the street. Harvard had announced that it was going virtual. There were, their students on vacation were told, don't come back. MGH partners, HMS had banned travel, and we were getting this maelstrom of emails from Hicks, as we are today, that just confusing and disorienting. In January, I had been ill. I had the flu, but it was swab negative, shaking, chills, sweats, really taken out of this life for a while. And I then developed bilobar pneumonia, which you can see up here a little bit. Then in February, we started the op-ed project, which you can hear more about. I think in a few weeks, there's another meeting. But I started to write a little more regularly. I had been writing very intermittently, kind of in a self-exploratory way, trying to make meaning of my experiences, cheaper than therapy. And in March, when I was about to go on vacation, we had a lockdown, no travel. So I was, again, stuck at home, divorced from my life, one part of my life, divorced from my MGH life. And I was quite concerned. I was not able to help the way I'm trained to. And I was worried. I was worried about you all. I was worried about my colleagues in the COVID environment, and I didn't know what was going on. And I was getting more and more disturbed, being at home, not being in the mix of things, getting these weird emails. So I was dealing with that, this feeling of impotence that I couldn't help. And thinking about death. What if? Is it okay to die so soon? And started thinking about this in a real way. What are my unfinished tasks? And I also got a little edgy about what I was imagining the response to deaths would be. I thought the tributes would be mundane and hackneyed. You think of Mad Libs, where you just insert a name and a gender and hackneyed phrases like selfless, courageous, running toward the fire, not away from it. And I felt that these tributes would be a disservice to the real gratitude, to the love that I feel. And I was feeling some grief for my missed opportunities, for my comfort, for what I thought would happen to colleagues, what they were going through. I don't think I've lost colleagues, but I know that my friends have been through a lot. And I was generally thinking a little bit more about the end of my career and life and what that means. And I felt I needed to do something. So I wrote this poem back then and sent it very quickly before I had really revised it many times to the mentor I had in the op-ed program. And she sent it on to, I wasn't even sure I wanted it out, but it was out. It was out. And so it is no longer mine, it is yours. And that's the way the cookie crumbles, I guess. So here's my process. First I say, a poem's gotta rhyme. That's kind of like faith. Otherwise, how do you know it's a poem? Or at least that's the way I think of it. What I do, a little bit like what we heard from Dr. Hatta, is I write down sort of freely images, phrases, processes, events, and different words that seem to resonate. And if they resonate, if I cry, I keep them because there's something there and it's something real. Then I kind of try to arrange them with some sort of purpose and something that's pleasing. There's probably more technically that I do on occasion, but it's also messy. And that's it. And so I thought, now I'll read that poem again. Unless there's something else I wanted to say, I don't know. I'll just read it again and see how you hear it and whether it's different. and then it's yours. My COVID epitaph. If I do not survive COVID, please note the hopes we shaped before. The concerts, hikes, and family feasts, still on schedule, still in store. I can write my colleagues' tributes now. I hope you will be flattered how you toiled, co-authored, supported staff. You smiled when it mattered. But we will die. I'm sorry, friend, that for us, it could be sharply while we labor on. Do you think that's as it should be? In the hallways, exam rooms, and clinics, doctoring amid pain and fears. Doctoring amid pain and tears. Shared mission, on-call nights, holding kind gravitas, calming our fears. What I left of me at the hospital created a void we sensed elsewhere, keying our door, scratching sweet Maggie in my lap, iPhone, my comfy chair. They bravely passed with no regrets. We salute them now. We loved, respected, and mourned them. But whom did I fail and how? And I can stop sharing screen, maybe? How does that work? There. Boop. And that's all.
Thank you, Michael. I've heard and read that poem many, many times now and shared it. And it still really gets me. When Kathy Mae Tran sent me her bio information to make an introduction, I read that she's been on staff at Mass General, having finished her residency 18 months ago. And I thought, this cannot be. It's not possible. She has accomplished so much, become such an enormous force in the culture of this place. It can't be, but it is. For those of you who don't know Kathy, you should. She's a hospitalist here at Mass General as of 18 months ago, apparently. I don't believe it, but we'll go with that. And her work as a clinician, teacher, writer, editor, and wellness advocate revolves around the stories of individuals. She's the Associate Psych Director of the HMS Practice of Medicine course and teaches first-year students how to collect stories in patient interviews and retell them as HPIs. She's the director of the Happiness Committee and advisory board member of the Center for Physician Wellbeing. She's also, in her spare time, assistant editor of the New England Journal of Medicine Case Records. And she writes, edits, and shares clinical stories on a global stage there. She is also the founder and director of the new MGH-wide storytelling initiative, The Stories of MGH. And she seeks and celebrates stories from staff in every corner of our community. Let's welcome Kathy Mae Tran.
Suzanne, thank you so much for that really warm welcome. And I want to take some time to recognize you too, because you have been a true force in our hospital and a mentor, colleague, friend to me definitely, but so many people on this call and so many people off of this call. And you are just tremendous. And thank you for inviting me to this Writers Showcase. Of all the times to speak at this during a year in which our staff has been so prolific in sharing our message during such a historic time, I'm so glad to be able to share a little bit about my story too. So I kind of have my feet in a lot of places, but I think there are some unifying threads to all of them. And part of it is the joy of stories. And it's the joy that it brings me personally and professionally, and also the joy that it brings to our colleagues that we're able to share it. There's an element of the human connection that we all crave. What better way to do that than through sharing stories? And I'm so fortunate to be able to, as a lover of stories, to celebrate them and share them and collect them through two of my roles, the case records, the MGH, and the stories, the MGH. For those of you not familiar with the case records, these are our clinical pathological conferences, our CPCs, which is a case-based teaching format that started right here at MGH over 100 years ago by Walter Cannon, and since then has become kind of a staple in medical education all over the world, but especially here. And our CPCs are published in the weekly New England Journal of Medicine. And then there's the stories of the MGH, which is significantly, relatively much newer endeavor. And as Suzanne mentioned, a hospital-wide storytelling initiative with two wings, the live events, and then also our photo storytelling collection. And these two endeavors mean a great deal to me. And I hope that I can convince you that they're also worthwhile for you to share as well. So I'm definitely not the first doctor with humanistic leanings, and I would venture to say every single person on this call watching the Writers Showcase is of the same thread. And I wanted to highlight one doctor that has preceded us, Dr. Richard C Cabot, and you might recognize his name because at the top of every case records is founded by Richard C Cabot. So Dr. Cabot was a blue-blooded Bostonian Brahmin, and he's a musician, as you can see from this picture, philosopher by training at Harvard. He was a thinker and a feeler and a writer and best friends with Ralph Waldo Emerson. And it wasn't until he went to vacation to the great state of New Jersey, of all places, and visited a TB sanatorium that he thought, hey, I can bring what I have, I can bring who I am, and I can do something bigger. I should become a doctor. And I suspect that a lot of us have similar stories about how we came to be, whether one came before the other. So Dr. Cabot really brought the CPCs and made them blossom here at MGH. And every CPC really is a story. It's a clinical story. And every CPC has a type of format, a way that we share the story. And of course, there's variations, but the format is very similar. So first of all, we share the story, typically a trainee or someone who's involved primarily in the patient's care. And we learn about the patient and who the patient is, what they feel, how they came to end up on the doorstep of MGH. And then the storyteller changes and we move on to our primary discussant. And he, she, or they look at the details of the story, use those as clues to try to analyze, interpret, and put the story together until the climax of the story, until the primary discussant puts their finger down on what they think is the most likely diagnosis. And then there's the revelation, in which we remove the shroud and the diagnostic test is revealed. And finally, the descent of the story, the fall of the story, and the management. And this is the story that we tell in every CPC. So when we make CPCs on this editorial board, it's a huge team that goes into every single CPC, and it's led by Dr. Eric Rosenberg, who is here at the bottom right-hand corner. An honor to work with this man, not only because he's a champion of clinical teaching and clinical stories, but also in his role as a microbiologist leading our lab, and really during this pandemic has been a force in our hospital, our city, and our entire state. So great to work with such an impactful person. And we also have associate editors, assistant editors, production editors, and an editorial fellow, and a whole New England Journal team that's behind us. Sometimes the process of putting these together is a little opaque. We're very fortunate to see these CPCs all the time. So I wanted to share a little bit about what goes into them. First of all, we have to find the story. So we are looking for patients, we're looking for topics that keyword has educational value. So actually very few CPCs are zebras. Most of them are common presentations of uncommon diseases, uncommon presentations of common diseases, or just really good classic cases that teach us a lot about patients. Then we need to tell the stories and find the storytellers. We write the cases, we recruit the discussants who we think are good orators and good writers. And then we host the CPCs at grand rounds for medicine, surgery, psychiatry, neurology, ophthalmology, ENT, and many other places. And here at MGH, because CPCs are so regular and we take them for granted, we think the process ends there, but it is just beginning, because in order to immortalize the story, we need to put pen to paper. So that's when we get to writing the story. And this is a whole process of copy editing and making collated roughs and content editing. And then we work on sharing the story once it's sent to the journal with illustrations and manuscript galleys, page proofs, paginations, and layouts. It's really an exciting process until we finally publish the story. And we make an astounding 40 CPCs a year in the Weekly New England Journal, which is a lot of stories, a lot of teaching, and also a lot of work, but all done with great joy and with great purpose. So here are some of our recent CPCs, of course, our beloved Katrina on the left, and last week, 2 DGIM members, Dr. Moore and Dr. Wing, at their joint CPC. And our CPCs go way beyond MGH, way beyond the 600,000 New England Journal readers per week, online and print. It also goes into the lay press. So our famous accidentally swallowed a toothpick case, our conjoined twins case, and more recently, our case of a patient who ate so much licorice that he developed hyperkalemia and sadly had a cardiac arrest. And these are the stories that we're trying to tell and that we're trying to learn from. So I, like you, was going about my life working on these CPCs, my biggest work outside of my clinical work, until our worlds really turned upside down when COVID entered our country, and 2 months after that, COVID entered our hospital. And as a frank confession, I felt very stunted during that time, professionally, personally, psychologically, emotionally. I really did feel crippled at that time, until our editor recommended that we pivot. And I think pivot is a big word here, because this is what our community did as writers and storytellers, is we pivoted and we tried to use our words and our stories to change. And so what we did in the CPCs is we started the COVID cases. Case 17-2020 was the first one, and we still kept the same storytelling format that we did in every CPC, but our delivery of the message changed. As soon as the CPC was accepted, we published it online in attempts to try to teach each other and our country, our world, as much as possible, as quickly as possible, available without a subscription. And I'm particularly proud that our COVID cases went beyond what is COVID, how do we treat COVID, into the issues surrounding COVID. So these are 2 CPCs that I did, case 19-2020 with Juliet Jacobson. How do we talk about DNR, DNI, full code when stakes are high, the pandemic is upon us, resources are low, and we have to limit exposures. Case 23-2020, a woman who died from COVID. This was the first autopsy of COVID that we did here at MGH. And I talked about, how do we consent for autopsy before the pandemic, during the pandemic? How do you broach this topic when already our staff and the patients and their families are so burdened? And how important is it in the first place? Case 21-2020 with Associate Editor Dave Dudzinski, talking about the tremendous work of Boston Healthcare for the Homeless. I see, Jim O'Connell, for example, on this call, and especially the work of the Boston Hope Field Hospital, and how we can, with a little bit of creativity, flexibility, organization, and thinking outside the box, we can treat a tremendous number of people with a short amount of time and limited resources. And so you can see in the CPCs, we are the clinical pathological conferences, but we're very much interested in the story behind the story. But I personally definitely wanted more, and that's where the stories of the MGH comes in. I've always been a lover of stories and a lover of the storytelling tradition in things like The Moth and The Nocturnist. To see a person stand on stage alone and bare their soul for others to see is a hugely brave experience to do and to watch. And I went to a storytelling session that was hosted by 2 chapters of the Society for Hospital Medicine, led by DGIM's David Lucier and G. Greenwald, as well as their colleagues from around the city. And this was a storytelling session for hospital medicine doctors in which they stood on stage and shared what they had to share, happy stories, sad stories, angry stories, and everything in between. And I was really inspired to bring this to our hospital, and specifically to move it beyond just hospital medicine. Everyone has a story to tell in our hospital. Every division, every department, every role group, we have stories to tell, and this is a way that we could connect as a community. And this did start before the pandemic, but really during the pandemic, the need for these stories became much more dire. So in assembling this great team that features, Dr. Suzanne Coven here at the top right, and many other people who I look up to as wonderful storytellers, we realized that this idea, this need, this craving for stories went far beyond this one idea. This was really a set of divergent ideas from all over the hospital that converged into this beautiful thing that became the stories of the MGH. I'm really proud that 6 members of our steering committee are represented by DGIM, but we also have representation from administration ED, from ED crit care, from palliative care, from endocrine, from trans health, from security. And we even have 2 internal medicine residents that run our photo storytelling collections. And what an honor and an inspiration to be able to work with these people who so passionately want to share the human spirit with our community. And I wanted to share a little bit about this process too, about how we go into collecting our stories. And you'll see a lot of common threads to what I shared earlier in the CPCs. First, we have to find the story. Everyone has a story. It's just whether or not we're willing to share it, or ready to share it, maybe is a better word. So what we've done is we've placed a call for submissions with a themed event. And our themes, we try to make them thought-provoking, to make them broad so that they can be interpreted and we can collect stories from a roller coaster of emotions, but at the same time have a common thread that unites them all. We need to find the storytellers, and all of the storytellers for the stories of the MGH come from MGH, and all of the stories they tell are true as remembered. And then we need to make the story. And as I'm sure a lot of you can feel and can identify with, oftentimes the story that we think we want to share is not the story that we end up sharing, or the story that we need to share. So we match our storytellers up with professional coaches, and 100% of the time we anticipate evolution of the story, and our storytellers share about the growth. And then we host a live storytelling event that's recorded and available on demand. So here's a storytelling session, but it's actually a CPC. This is Hugh Cabot, Dr. Richard Cabot's little brother, who's a surgeon. But this is a storytelling event. He's standing with everyone around him, captivated with what he's saying, with the clinical story. And we try to create that with the stories of the MGH, with our inaugural event, the COVID-19 experience. Instead of having 130 people around our storytellers, however, we had a captive audience of 10 because of physical distancing. But on demand, we've had almost 2,000 viewers watch these stories, and it's still available. If you haven't seen it, I would highly recommend it, but make sure that you devote some time to savor the experience, because this is a powerful one. These are our 7 storytellers who represent nursing, critical care, surgery, security, primary care, social work, marketing, and leadership. And we're so grateful to have the support of Dr. Slavin too, who also participated in the event. And these wonderful women shared stories about their COVID-19 experience. Brittany Bankhead Kendall shared about the tension between being a mother and a physician, and her ultimate decision to send her children away for months because she had an obligation to take care of the patients in our hospital. About Lauren Camino Diso, who was a cancer social worker, finding herself taking care of COVID patients, and how she learned that joy runs faster than grief can walk. Truly powerful stories that that you can relate to, every single one. And so many of us have stories to tell, and we can't feature them all during our live storytelling events. So we've collected them in the photo storytelling collection that we have on social media at Stories in the MGH on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. All of the people you see here and all of the stories you read here are, once again, people in our community who have stories to tell. We work with them to craft their stories into a written form, and we actually match them with hobbyist photographers who are also MGH staff members to make these beautiful collaborations. Aparna Parikh here at the bottom of the screen, cancer doctor who was the first healthcare worker at MGH to be diagnosed with COVID. She shares an incredibly vulnerable story of the guilt that she felt, of the fear that she had for herself, but also for her kids, her husband, her patients, and ultimately how she was able to go beyond that and heal. Dr. Ashley Shaw up here at the top, pediatrics resident who founded herself taking care of adult patients. And she tells a story of 3,000 miles. 3 rooms away, she was transferring an adult patient to the ICU. 3,000 miles, she was on the phone as a healthcare proxy doing the same for her grandfather. So a year has passed. I cannot believe it. And COVID is still here. We are still feeling the same emotions that we felt 1 year ago. But it's much more apparent to me now that I've had time to not be frozen in anxiety, that we have way more issues to discuss and way more stories to tell. In the case records, we're working on this. Our recent CPCs have featured stories of homelessness and mental health, gun violence, of immigration and asylum, and of how cultural contexts can sometimes lead to medical misdiagnoses. And in the stories of the MGH, we're depending on people like you to bring us stories that are important to us, that need to be told. So I'm really grateful to you for letting me share my love of stories and my role as a collector and editor and molder of stories. And I want to tell you that I am still looking for your stories, stories that intrigue us, teach us, touch us, comfort us, heal us, and most of all, the stories that really need to be told. And I'll end my talk with a call to you to ask you, what's your story? So do you have a clinical story that you need to share with our community, with our hospital, with our country, with our world? Please email me or share it by our submission link. And do you have a story to tell on stage with our community? This is a powerful experience for the storyteller and the audience. And we're actually planning our next Stories of the MGH event right now. It'll take place in March, and we have a call for submissions open now. And our theme is the me you don't see. So submit your story. We want to tell it. We want to help you tell it. So I really live my life by gratitude, and I could fill 10,000 slides with the people who have brought me to where I am today. But in the case records, the stories of the MGH and the DGIM, I just wanted to highlight a few people. Of course, Dr. Eric Rosenberg, who has been a professional and a personal mentor to me. Doctors Carrie Palmer McGrath, Jeff Greenwald, Hemel Sumpat from the stories, and Suzanne, who spans all of these roles for me as a celebrator of stories and a person who allows us to have this space to share. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for letting me tell your stories.
Thank you so much, Kathy. And we're at the hour, and since Josh had to run off to the Bigelow and isn't here to ask the first question, I think that we should simply leave it unasked. I will invite you not only to submit your stories to Stories of the MGH, but also to me if you want to explore writing, if you've written something, please do drop me a line. I'm happy to help. Thanks, everyone.
Yep, and I'll just
Let's have a round of virtual applause
yes, virtual
for our three
virtual
presenters.
Virtual applause. Thanks to Suzanne for organizing this every year. It's always a big highlight. We love to see the talents of our DGIM colleagues. Thank you very much, the three of you, for sharing those stories, and look forward to next January when we do this again. I will make a note, the CME code in the initial flyer was not correct. I put the new one in the chat, and you'll also see it in the email. Take care, everyone. We'll see you next month for the Sandler Scholar.